Have you ever wondered what rich people are hiding inside their houses? Because what if I told you that I went to a sleepover at a rich person's house that I barely knew, but when I arrived, there was only one rule. Don't go in the room with the red door. But of course, hearing that rule only made me want to do one thing. Go inside that room. So I did. But what I discovered for opening that door and the consequences I faced for doing this made me decide that I will never sleep over at a rich person's house again. But to understand how we even got to this terrifying moment, I need to take you back to how this crazy night all started. So everyone knows that rich people do not live in the same world as normal people. They have closets bigger than my whole house, which I'm literally in my closet right now, by the way. Pets that wear more expensive clothes than I do. And if they're really rich, they have an air fryer. The point is, rich people are crazy. And I realized that the moment I got invited to a sleepover at a rich person's house. I was 16 years old and hanging out with my friend from my baseball team. He wasn't the rich one, sadly, but one day after practice, he asks if I want to go to a sleepover with him. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds fun. Are we doing it at your house? But he says, no, it's at the house of a kid that I just met. So I'm thinking, well, why would you want me to go to a sleepover at a random person's house that I don't even know? But his response is that the person's house he's going to has super rich parents, and he doesn't want to go to the sleepover alone because he thinks it would be awkward. So he invited the most awkward person he knows, because that would make it better. But with the way he was describing how rich this kid and his family were, I was like, heck yeah, I'll go, because I need some rich friends. I'm trying to make it out the suburbs. But little did I know, I would hugely come to regret this decision of going to that sleepover. So let's fast forward to the night this all happened. My friend and I arrived to the rich person's house, which of course was in a gated neighborhood. But right when we go through those gates, the vibes are already starting to feel off. Because we get out of the car to see this glamorous house that's way bigger than my dreams could ever be. Like you could tell, whoever owned this house was rich. And I mean rich in the sense that they could afford snacks at the movie theater. The rich kid, who we'll call Gary, because I don't want to use his real name since his family might do something to me. I don't know, they're rich, I don't know what they're gonna do. But anyways, Gary opened the door and said to us, yo, what's up guys? Let me show you around the house. So we step inside, and the moment me and my friend went through that front door, it felt like we got transformed onto a movie set. Everything looked too perfect to be real. The first room had this massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling that was probably 3 stories high, and the floors were so shiny, I could see my reflection in them. But the one thing I really noticed about this place was the art. For some reason, this house had a bunch of art all over the place. And I'm not talking normal art. And keep that in mind because it will be important to know for later in the story. So we're getting a tour of the place, and it's just getting crazier and crazier every room we go into. First stop was the private movie theater, which wasn't just a big TV in a basement like I was used to. This thing had actual theater seats, a popcorn machine, and a screen that took up an entire wall. You want to know what I watch movies on at my house? This.
It's a Wendy's menu screen!
Then we went to the indoor pool, which I've only seen in hotels before, but this was when the night started to not feel like a normal sleepover anymore. Because inside this room with the pool was where we first met the butler. At first I thought it was awesome having a butler, because I'd never seen one in real life. The only butler I knew was Bertram from Jessie. But after being in that house for a little bit, I realized somehow this guy was everywhere. And you may say, well yeah, Tyler, that's like kind of his job. But no, something was off about the way he was acting. Because Gary finished showing us around the house and asked if we wanted to play video games. We said yeah, so we head upstairs toward the gaming room, which of course they had a gaming room. But this was the last room that we hadn't been to yet. Or at least, so we thought. Because when we get into the gaming room, there's another door inside it. But this door looks way different from any other one in the house. It was standing out like a sore thumb because it was painted red and about half the size of all the other doors. So of course, me and my friend asked Gary, hey, where does that door go to? But Gary, who had been super nice and cool up to this point, becomes super serious and says, don't worry about that. Let's just play Mario Kart. So my friend, who obviously knew Gary better and was more comfortable with him, says, wait, now I really want to know what's inside there. But Gary just responds with, it doesn't matter, just ignore it. That door hasn't been open in years anyway. This was weird, because if there had been no secrets hiding beyond that door, surely Gary would have just told us what was inside there so we wouldn't be so curious anymore. But what I didn't know when Gary said this was that he was lying straight to our faces. My friend and I look at each other, and I could tell we were thinking the exact same thing. You can't just tell someone there's a locked room they're not allowed to go in and expect them to just forget about it. That's like me telling you to not think about a pink elephant. What did you just think about? A pink elephant. Or at least I hope so, or else I'll sound dumb. But I'm pretty sure you did. The whole vibe of the sleepover changed after that warning. Everything that had seemed fun and amazing just 5 minutes ago now felt different. I kept looking at that door, wondering what was inside there that made him so scared to talk about. It was all I could focus on now. So we're playing video games for a while. When it gets to around 11 p.m., when Gary gets tired and says, "Hey, I'm gonna go to bed early." He tells us that we can keep hanging out in here if we want, but to just not break anything. And then he just disappears into his bedroom. He was an only child, so it was no surprise when he said that he was going into his room to sleep alone, and we could sleep somewhere else. But when Gary went to bed, me and my friend were thinking the exact same thing. We basically just got handed the keys to this mansion for the whole night. Now, we could go explore more of the house and find the truth behind what they were hiding. We didn't want to try going into the weird, creepy red room door yet because we weren't sure how long it would take for Gary to fall asleep. So we agreed that it would be better to do that later in the night when we knew that everyone would be sleeping, including the butler. Keep that in mind, because the butler would end up being very important later in the story. Since we didn't want to go in the red door room yet, we decided to go check out the backyard, because Gary never took us out there either. But then we realized there was a reason why. Because when we stepped into his backyard, first of all, it was huge. It had a big pool, which, why do you need an indoor pool and an outdoor pool? I don't know. You can do whatever you want when you're rich. But we had an amazing discovery in the backyard when we're just walking around, and out of nowhere, we see a ginormous tortoise. And when I say ginormous, this thing probably had to be 600 or 700 pounds. My friend tells me that Gary had told him about this tortoise before and that it's over 100 years old, which means the tortoise was older than the United States. I think. Is it? No? Never mind, I just looked it up. That is not true. But still, this thing was old. Like, the fact that this turtle lived through World War I and Prime Fortnite was crazy to me. We sat down on the grass next to this ancient creature, but as we're just chilling there, something caught my eye. At first I thought it was just a light reflecting off the windows of the house, but after looking for a couple seconds, there was definitely something flickering upstairs. The light wasn't steady like a lamp or overhead lighting. It was moving around like someone was controlling it with a flashlight or a candle. But my stomach dropped when I realized exactly which room this light was coming from. It was the same side of the house where our friend told us not to go. The exact spot where the room with the red door was supposed to be. I grabbed my friend's arm and pointed up to that window, and I could see the shock in his face. We both stared up at that flickering light, trying to figure out what could possibly be hiding in there. By now, Gary should have been asleep in his room, which was on the other side of the house. So, who was walking around in the room that we weren't supposed to enter? And wait, remember what Gary said when we were playing video games? No one has been in that room in years. All of a sudden, the situation was real fishy. We tried asking the tortoise what was in that room, but he didn't speak English. Now, me and my friend knew that we had to figure out what or who was hiding inside that room. The flickering light turned that room from something we were curious about to something we needed to investigate. So we headed back inside the house with this new piece of information eating at our heads. We waited a couple hours until the middle of the night, and then we knew it was go time. You know how there's just something about 2 a.m. that makes everything feel scarier? Like during the day, creaky houses and weird sounds are just normal stuff that happens. But once that clock hits the middle of the night, suddenly every noise becomes a potential ghost or a murderer. That's exactly what was happening as we tried to figure out what that flickering light in the room was. Because that clock finally struck 2 a.m. and we thought to ourselves, if there was any time to sneak into that room without getting caught, it was now. So we're preparing to sneak into this forbidden room like it's a Call of Duty mission, when suddenly we hear a noise coming from that side of the house. It kind of sounded like someone was dragging a heavy piece of furniture across the floor, like a dresser or maybe a desk. The scraping noise went on for about 10 seconds, then stopped completely. We both froze and looked at each other, and I could tell, once again, we were thinking the same thing. That sound came from the second floor, and it sounded like it came from the exact spot where the forbidden room was. We knew for sure that it couldn't be mistaken for Gary's room because that was on the other side of the house. So we were confident that it was happening in that creepy little red door room. And let me tell you, we tried everything to figure out why there would be noises coming from that room if A, no one had been in there in years, and B, Gary was the only other person in the house besides us. Because deep down, we knew something weird was happening inside that room. And there was no good explanation for why there was noises coming out of there at 2 a.m. And you might think that this just made us more curious and excited to go in that room, but honestly, it did the opposite. We were really sketched out to find out what was in there. Because all we knew at this point was that it had to be something more than what Gary was telling us. So we weren't sure if we had the guts to still try going in there. Something happened that made it feel like we had to figure out what was inside there. As we're walking through the house, randomly, out of nowhere, we hear a sound, and then the power goes off. Complete darkness hit the entire mansion like someone just flipped a switch. No warning, no flickering lights, just instant darkness that was so thick that I couldn't even see my hand right in front of my face. And it wasn't just their house. When we looked out the window, we could tell that it was the whole neighborhood. So me and my friend are standing there in pitch black silence, surrounded by all this expensive furniture that we couldn't even see anymore. When we realized this was actually the perfect opportunity. With no lights on in the entire house, nobody would notice us sneaking into that creepy little red door room. The darkness that had seemed terrifying just 5 seconds ago suddenly became our cover for getting into that room. Me and my friend looked at each other, kinda, but we couldn't see each other's faces because it was super dark, but we both agreed this was an opportunity we had to take. So we made the decision that would change everything at this sleepover. It's time to go find out what's up there for ourselves. So we went back up to the gaming room where the red door was connected to, and we're walking right next to each other. Like I'm talking skin on skin. That sounded weird. But we didn't want to turn our phone lights on because we were trying to be as discreet as possible. So we're walking through the complete darkness. And eventually, we get back to the gaming room. And then, to the red door. Before trying to open it, we put our ears up to the door to see if we could hear anything coming from it. But there was nothing except silence on the other side. So we both take a deep breath, and for the first time, we try turning the knob on the door. I was about 105% sure that this door would be locked based off how Gary was acting. But to our surprise, it was open. Maybe this meant that most people weren't dumb enough to actually try going in there, so they could just leave it open. But anyway, we pulled on the knob, and immediately we could feel dust from the room filling up our nostrils. We weren't sure what was in here yet, but Gary definitely wasn't lying when he said that people don't come in here a lot, because it was dusty. So before fully opening the door, I said, "Hello?" just to check if anyone was in there that was willing to respond. But we got no response back. And part of me was expecting someone to respond because of the noises that we heard earlier and the lights we saw coming from the room. So how did all these things happen if no one was actually in here? Well, when we didn't get a response back after saying hello, finally, we opened the door fully. And we saw exactly why Gary wanted to keep this room a secret, but not the whole reason. Because inside this dusty old room was a bunch of paintings, all the same types. Portraits of people that looked like they were made hundreds of years ago. But Tyler, why would this be something that Gary wanted to hide so much? Well, here's the thing about these paintings. They weren't just normal portraits. The weird thing about them was that on every single one of them, the eyes were punched out. And not with paint. It was as if someone got a knife and poked a hole through it. What in the world did all this mean? We had no idea yet. But why would this be something that Gary wanted to hide? There obviously had to be a bigger story about these paintings for why he was so overprotective of them. Or maybe this wasn't even the reason that he didn't want us coming in here. Maybe there was something else. Because remember, like I said, there was a light moving around in here earlier. But we weren't going to stop until we figured out the whole truth. So we kept exploring the room, fascinated by these paintings, but also trying to find out what that moving light was earlier. After searching every inch of that room, we realized the only thing that was left in here now was dust and these old paintings. Nothing that could explain to us what was actually going on up here or why he didn't want us going in there. That was until, as we're looking at the pictures, the door, which we left cracked, suddenly creaks all the way open. And coming from the gaming room was a bright light with someone behind it. The light flashes in our faces and we freeze like statues in this room full of creepy paintings, wondering if we just got caught and if something bad was about to happen to us. My heart felt like it stopped beating for a solid 5 seconds before the light is slowly lowered so we can see that it's the butler. All I could think was, we're so cooked. Because getting caught in the one place we weren't supposed to go is bad enough. But getting caught by the butler, who already gave us bad vibes that whole night, was worst case scenario. And everyone knows that if rich people have a problem, they'll take care of it by just getting rid of it. And in this scenario, we were the problem. My friend grabbed onto my arm so tight that he was cutting off my circulation, and we both just stood there like deer in headlights. The butler wasn't moving or saying anything, just standing in that doorway with a flashlight in his hand. In that moment, when we were surrounded by all those portraits with their eyes gouged out, everything felt super sinister and dangerous. Like maybe we had just stumbled into something that was way more serious than just something that Gary didn't want to show us. I'm starting to think maybe this butler isn't just some normal employee. Maybe he's the one who gouged out all these eyes. And there's something much bigger going on here. What if he was planning to do what they did to those paintings to us next? They just come right up next to us and go, "Uss." I feel like I low-key sound kind of schizophrenic right now. Let's carry on though. I kept thinking about all these movies where the seemingly normal staff member is the real villain. It's always the one you'd least expect. So after a couple seconds of standing there, completely frozen, the butler finally spoke. But his voice was completely calm and normal. Like he wasn't literally standing in a terrifying room at 2 a.m. And this is what he said to us. Hey, I'm sorry if I startled you boys. The power just went out, so I was coming up here to check the electrical panel. Wait, so you're not here to make us mysteriously disappear? He laughed a little bit and then said, "Ha, so I see you boys found the collector's room." We asked him what he meant by collector's room, and he told us. All the paintings inside this room were from an artist that was in their family. And this artist thing was to make portraits of real people, but gouge out their eyes. And we're not talking like artist that was alive at this time. No, this was hundreds of years ago, he said. So these paintings were old, and to them, priceless. This sounded reasonable to me and my friend, but still, we had to ask, why would Gary try so hard just to hide all this? What was so bad about us finding these paintings? Or even if he didn't want us going in here, why wouldn't he just tell us that it was paintings in here? The butler then explained to us that these paintings were worth a lot of money. So Gary's parents would always tell him to never let anyone inside that room because they treat that room like it's just one big safe and basically all those paintings is the money. And they didn't want a bunch of people knowing that there were valuable paintings up there. And as for the random light that we saw moving up there when we were chilling outside with the tortoise, it turns out that was the butler again checking the electrical panel because he got a notice that the power was gonna go out for a little bit. So he was just making sure that all their backup stuff was ready. And the sound of furniture we heard moving up there, actually, I still don't know what that was. But I'm just gonna choose to ignore that and assume that it wasn't anything terrifying for my own mental health. So, yeah, that's it.